You don't need exotic animals or space mysteries to get fooled by a fact. Sometimes all it takes is a garbage disposal, an escalator, a window, a coffee mug, a screen, or a soda can, and our brains fill in whatever we can't see inside. This time, we're going through 47 completely different beliefs built around ordinary objects and technologies. We'll find out why the brushes on an escalator aren't there to shine your shoes, what a thermos is really holding, why two silver-looking metals can fight corrosion in completely different ways, and how a simple file extension can lie about what is actually inside the file. Fact number 1. The garbage disposal under your kitchen sink chops food with sharp spinning blades like a blender. Look down the drain, flip the switch, and you hear a powerful motor tearing scraps apart. The mental picture forms instantly. There must be a little set of razor-sharp blades spinning underneath, basically a hidden blender. That picture is wrong for many common household disposals. Instead of blender-style knives, these units typically use a rotating plate with small swinging lugs or impellers that fling food waste against a stationary grinding ring. The material gets crushed, torn, and ground into smaller particles that can move through the plumbing with running water. The important clue is the mechanism itself. Those moving pieces do not need knife edges. Their job is to accelerate the scraps and force them against grinding surfaces. That does not make a garbage disposal safe to reach into. A powerful motor, moving hardware, and jammed objects are still serious hazards, even without blender blades. The fact came from the sound. We hear a machine destroying food, and our brain draws knives. A garbage disposal is not a blender hiding under the sink. It is closer to a small impact and grinding chamber. Fact number 2. The long brushes running along the sides of an escalator are there to clean your shoes. You step on, your sneaker brushes against the edge, and there is a perfectly placed row of bristles. It looks like a free little shoe cleaning service built into the ride. That interpretation is so intuitive that some people deliberately press their shoes against the brushes. The real purpose is safety. Those skirt brushes are meant to discourage shoes, clothing, and other objects from getting too close to the narrow gap between the moving steps and the stationary side panel. The bristles provide a tactile warning before your foot moves into a potential pinch or entrapment area. Their location gives the game away. If they were designed for cleaning, you would expect them to invite pressure. Instead, they are placed exactly where the escalator wants you to move your foot away. Escalators also use other safety features, including skirt geometry, comb plates, switches, and emergency stops. None of those makes accidents impossible, which is why riders are still told to stand within the step and away from the sides. The brushes feel friendly because they are soft. They are not a perk. They are a boundary telling you, as gently as possible, not to move any farther toward the edge. Fact number 3. Every double-pane window insulates because there is an almost perfect vacuum between the two panes. Two sheets of glass separated by a sealed gap look a lot like the walls of a thermos. And since a vacuum is excellent at reducing conduction and convection, the explanation sounds elegant. Remove all the air, seal the window, and heat has nowhere to go. But most conventional insulated glass units do not contain a deep vacuum. The space is usually filled with dry air or a gas, such as argon or krypton. Those gases can reduce heat transfer compared with a single pane and improve the overall performance of the window. The structural clue matters. Holding a strong vacuum between two large panes creates a major pressure difference that tries to force the glass inward. True vacuum-insulated glazing exists, but it requires special engineering to support that load, which is exactly why it is a separate technology from ordinary double glazing. Real performance also depends on low emissivity coatings, spacers, seals, gap thickness, and frame quality. Two windows that both have two panes can perform very differently. The fact took a real insulation technology and turned it into a universal explanation. Between the panes of an ordinary insulated window, there usually is nothing. There is a carefully controlled space designed to transfer less heat. Fact number 4. If your dishwasher finishes a hot cycle, the dishes come out sterilized and completely free of microorganisms. Open the door after a hot wash, and the steam, detergent, and blazing hot plates make the inside look like a mini laboratory. If heat kills microbes, sterilized feels like the obvious word. But sterilization has a much stricter meaning. To sterilize something is to eliminate or destroy all viable forms of microbial life within the scope of the process. A residential dishwasher is not automatically operating like a medical autoclave. Some dishwashers do include certified sanitizing cycles. In the U.S., NSF ANSI 184 covers residential dishwashers that make sanitization claims, with specific performance criteria for temperature and bacterial reduction. Sanitize is meaningful. It still does not mean absolute sterility. Results also depend on how the dishwasher is loaded, whether water reaches all surfaces, which cycle is selected, and whether food residue shields parts of the dish. None of this makes dishwashers ineffective. Cleaning and dramatically reducing microbial load is exactly what they are supposed to do in a normal kitchen. The fact exists because everyday speech treats disinfect, sanitize, and sterilize like stronger versions of the same adjective. Microbiology does not. Your dishwasher can leave dishes very clean and sanitized. It does not turn dinner plates into surgical instruments. Fact number 5. A household radiator is called a radiator because it heats a room almost entirely through thermal radiation. The name sounds like a technical confession. If it is a radiator, then it must mainly send infrared radiation across the room toward people, walls, and furniture. But a radiator can transfer heat in more than one way. Its hot surface does emit thermal radiation. At the same time, it heats the air touching it. That warmer air becomes less dense, rises, and creates convection currents that move heat around the room. How much heat arrives by radiation versus convection depends on the design. A flat panel, finned radiator, baseboard convector, and radiant floor system do not divide the job the same way. There is an easy clue. Hold your hand above a hot radiator, and you can feel warm air rising. That energy is being carried by moving air, not only by infrared radiation traveling straight outward. And not everything that emits thermal radiation gets called a radiator. You are emitting it right now. The appliance kept a useful historical name, not a contract promising one exclusive mechanism. It heats by radiating and by warming air. The room gets the full heat transfer package, even if the name only advertises one part of it. And if even a name as literal as radiator can hide two mechanisms at once, the next 5 turn humidity, vacuum, plumbing, and porcelain into even better traps. Fact number 6. A dehumidifier cools a room because it removes water from the air the same way an air conditioner does. Turn one on in a muggy basement, and a few hours later the room feels less sticky. Since air conditioners also remove moisture, it is easy to assume both machines are basically doing the same job, and that the dehumidifier should lower the room temperature while it fills its tank. Internally, they do share part of the same idea. Many household dehumidifiers cool air enough for water vapor to condense on a cold surface. But then that same air passes over a warmer section of the refrigeration system before it returns to the room. The heat released during condensation, plus the electrical energy used by the compressor and fan, ends up mostly back in that same space. That is why a standalone dehumidifier often raises room temperature slightly rather than cooling it. An air conditioner changes the energy story by dumping a large portion of the heat outside the space it is trying to cool. The key is to follow energy, not just water. Condensing moisture releases latent heat, and the motor does not work for free. The room may still feel much more comfortable because lower humidity helps sweat evaporate more effectively. A dehumidifier removes water. It does not secretly open a door for heat to escape the house. Fact number 7. The vacuum inside a thermos keeps a drink cold because the vacuum stores or produces cold around it. Fill an insulated bottle with ice water in the morning, and it can still be cold hours later. There is no visible motor, refrigerant pack, or cooling gel between the walls, so the empty space starts to sound like a special substance that holds the cold. Physics keeps a different set of books. Cold is not a fuel you store. What we are really tracking is thermal energy moving from warmer regions toward cooler ones. A vacuum helps by reducing that transfer. With very few molecules between the walls, conduction and convection across that space are greatly reduced. Reflective surfaces can also cut down radiative heat transfer. The lid, neck, and physical contact points still provide paths for heat, so the insulation is never perfect. There is an easy test. Pour a room temperature drink into a thermos. The bottle does not cool it on its own. It simply helps preserve whatever thermal state the drink already had. The same principle works for hot coffee. A thermos does not create cold. It removes some of the highways heat normally uses to travel. Fact number 8. The P-shaped trap under your sink is mainly there to catch rings and other objects that fall down the drain. Take one apart, and sometimes you really do find an earring, coin, screw, or other small object sitting in the bend. That makes the plumbing look like a built-in rescue pocket for anything heavy enough to sink. It can catch lost objects. That is not its main sanitary purpose. The curved trap holds a small amount of water after each use. That standing water creates a seal that helps stop sewer and drain gases from moving freely back into the room. You see the real job when a trap dries out after a sink has not been used for a long time. Even with no debris and no lost jewelry, odors may appear because the water seal is gone. Plumbing codes specify trap and seal requirements for exactly this reason. Venting also helps keep pressure conditions from siphoning the water out. The accidental jewelry catching function is memorable because recovering a lost ring feels like a household miracle. But the P-trap was not hired as a jeweler. Its daily job is far less glamorous and far more important. Let wastewater go down without giving the drain system a wide open path back into your house. Fact number 9. The loud bang in a pipe after you close a faucet is simply an air bubble bouncing around inside the plumbing. You shut a valve quickly, and the wall answers with a sharp knock. Since air compresses and bubbles move, it is easy to imagine a trapped pocket of gas racing through the pipe and slamming into an elbow. Classic water hammer is mainly a pressure wave, created by a rapid change in liquid velocity. When a moving column of water is forced to stop suddenly, its momentum does not simply disappear. Pressure changes sharply and a wave travels through the plumbing, reflecting from valves, pipe ends, and changes in geometry. The important clue is that this can happen in a pipe completely filled with liquid. A big free-floating air bubble is not required. In fact, air chambers and other compressible devices have been used to help cushion pressure changes. Trapped air can cause other plumbing noises and problems. It is just not the universal explanation for every hammer after a fast valve closure. There was no little bubble wearing a helmet and crashing into the wall. There was an invisible pressure wave reminding you that even household water has inertia. Fact number 10. A gravity toilet removes waste by creating a powerful vacuum that sucks everything through the pipe like a vacuum cleaner. Push the handle, the bowl level changes, and everything disappears with a swirl and a gulping sound. Suction feels like the perfect description. In many gravity-fed siphonic toilets, the tank rapidly dumps water into the bowl. That surge raises the water level and fills the curved outlet passage. Once flow is established, gravity and siphonic action help move water and waste through the trapway until air enters and breaks the siphon. There is no hidden vacuum pump behind the porcelain. The main energy comes from water stored at a higher level and from gravity. Other designs, including pressure-assisted toilets, use additional mechanisms, so even this correction should not be turned into a rule for every toilet ever made. The tank is the clue. If the system were basically a vacuum cleaner, the height and volume of the flush water would be secondary details. In reality, they are central to the hydraulic action. The toilet sounds like it is sucking the room. What it is really doing is using water, geometry, and gravity to start and then break a siphon in a controlled way. So far, machines have fooled us by what they do. Now materials are going to fool us by what they look like: paint, flooring, and metals, with names that promise a composition that may not actually be there. Fact number 11. Household latex paint contains natural tree latex, like the material used in rubber gloves. The word seems far too specific to be metaphorical. If the can says latex paint, the natural assumption is that the binder somehow comes from the same milky sap harvested from rubber trees. But modern architectural latex paint usually uses a water-based dispersion of synthetic polymer particles, such as acrylic or vinyl acrylic polymers. As the water evaporates and the coating cures, those particles form a continuous film. The product does not need to contain the natural latex proteins found in rubber tree latex. The clue is the technical meaning of the word. In polymer chemistry, a dispersion of tiny polymer particles in water can be called a latex, even when the polymer never came from a tree. That matters because the word alone should not be treated as proof that the paint contains the same natural latex proteins associated with rubber latex allergies. Actual composition depends on the product. The paint did not exactly lie. The technical meaning of latex expanded beyond plant sap into a way of describing polymer dispersions. Your wall may be flexible even if a rubber tree had nothing to do with the recipe. Fact number 12. Linoleum and vinyl flooring are two names for the same flexible plastic floor. Both can come in sheets, imitate wood or stone, and cover an entire kitchen with very few seams. For decades, linoleum became a catch-all word in many households for almost any resilient flooring. Traditional linoleum and modern vinyl flooring are chemically different. Linoleum is made from ingredients such as oxidized linseed oil, resins, wood or cork flour, mineral fillers, and a backing material. Vinyl flooring uses PVC polymers along with plasticizers, fillers, and engineered layers depending on the product. The name linoleum even hints at its history, coming from words associated with flax and oil. That does not mean one material is automatically natural and good, while the other is plastic and bad. Durability, emissions, maintenance, recyclability, and performance depend on formulation, installation, and life cycle. The correction is about identity, not advertising. Two floors can feel nearly identical under your socks and still belong to completely different material families. Fact number 13. Galvanized steel and stainless steel are basically the same rust-resistant metal with two marketing names. Both show up outdoors, in kitchens, on screws, and in hardware expected to tolerate moisture. Both can look silvery. Their protection mechanisms are very different. Galvanized steel is usually carbon steel coated with zinc. That zinc acts as a barrier and can also provide sacrificial protection to exposed steel around small areas of damage. Stainless steel contains enough chromium in the alloy itself to form an extremely thin, passive, chromium-rich oxide film that slows corrosion. The difference becomes obvious if the surface is cut or worn. On galvanized material, protection depends heavily on the zinc coating and how much remains around the exposed area. In stainless steel, chromium is present through the alloy, and the passive film can reform under suitable conditions. Neither material is invincible. Salts, chlorides, acids, heat, and poor design can still cause corrosion. The silver color grouped two completely different chemical strategies together. One dresses steel in zinc. The other changes the steel's recipe so the surface can help defend itself. Fact number 14. A chrome-plated faucet or part is made almost entirely from solid chromium. The surface looks like a mirror, and the product description says chrome. Since you cannot see brass, steel, zinc, plastic, or nickel underneath, your brain treats the shiny outer appearance as if it describes the whole object. But on many products, chromium is only a very thin surface layer. Underneath it may be nickel, and beneath that may be a substrate made from steel, brass, zinc alloy, or another material. Chromium can provide hardness, shine, wear resistance, and corrosion performance without making up most of the object's mass. Electroplating exists because a tiny amount of one material can give the surface useful properties without building the entire object from it. And some products sold with a chrome look use other finishing systems, so the commercial name does not always describe one universal process. A shiny surface is not an X-ray. Chromium may be the skin, not the skeleton. Sometimes a few microns of material convince your eyes that there must be inches of it underneath. Fact number 15. Sterling silver is 100% pure silver, and the 925 stamp is just a manufacturing quality code. If a piece of jewelry says sterling silver, it sounds strange to imagine that any other metal is mixed in. Traditionally, 925 indicates a composition of about 925 parts silver per thousand. The remaining portion is commonly copper or other metals. There is a practical reason. Nearly pure silver is relatively soft for many everyday objects. Alloying it can improve hardness and mechanical performance. That is the difference between fine silver and sterling silver. Both are legitimately described as silver in jewelry language, but they do not mean the same purity. The fact exists because we often assume purity and quality always rise together. Materials do not work that way. A more chemically pure metal can be mechanically less convenient for the job. The 925 mark is not a secret password. It is basically the material admitting that silver decided to share the object with a small amount of other metals so it could survive real-world use better. The next 5 replace shine with chemistry. Purity, color, and gemstone names can make us confuse an alloy, a coating, or even fossilized resin with something completely different. Fact number 16. German silver, alpaca, or nickel silver contains a significant amount of actual silver. The name sounds like a chemical guarantee. If someone offers you a tray made of German silver, it is natural to picture silver from Germany, or a lower purity silver alloy. But nickel silver is traditionally an alloy of copper, nickel, and zinc. The silver refers to appearance, not a required content of elemental silver. Similar alloys are also called alpaca in some markets. Nickel silver has been useful for flatware, musical instruments, fittings, and as a base metal for silver-plated objects because it can resemble silver while offering practical mechanical properties. Compositions vary by standard, era, and manufacturer, and some pieces may also have a real silver coating on top. But the core material called nickel silver does not require silver. This fact is the periodic table losing an argument to color. A metal can look silver without containing silver, just as a cloud can look like cotton without containing a single fiber. Fact number 17. 24-karat gold is always the hardest and most durable choice because it is the highest quality. 24 sounds like the maximum, and in jewelry, maximum easily turns into best at everything. Since 24-karat gold contains a higher proportion of gold than 18 or 14-karat alloys, it feels logical to assume it must resist scratches and dents better too. But purity and hardness are different properties. Pure gold is relatively soft and extremely malleable. Mixing it with other metals can significantly change hardness, wear resistance, color, and manufacturing behavior. That is why many pieces intended for daily wear use lower karat gold alloys. A 24-karat ring does not have an extra armor layer just because it contains more gold. Under some conditions, it can scratch or deform more easily. That does not make 24-karat gold worse. It may be preferred for purity, color, tradition, investment, or style. The choice depends on what property matters. Carats tell you about the proportion of gold. They do not promise hardness, scratch resistance, or invulnerability. Sometimes the purest jewelry is exactly the jewelry that needs gentler treatment. Fact number 18. White gold is a naturally occurring kind of pure gold that comes out of the ground silver-colored. Jewelry cases show yellow gold, rose gold, and white gold side by side, which makes it look as though nature supplies 3 different color versions of the same metal. Elemental gold has its characteristic yellow color. White gold is produced by alloying gold with paler metals such as palladium, nickel, or other alloy systems depending on the product. Many pieces are also plated with rhodium to create an even whiter, brighter surface. The clue appears with wear. On some jewelry, a warmer tone can become visible as the rhodium plating wears. That does not mean the piece turned into yellow gold. It means the surface and the underlying alloy never looked exactly the same to begin with. Recipes vary by manufacturer and market, so white describes a family of jewelry results, not a new element on the periodic table. The mine supplies gold. The workshop decides what metals it will live with and what color the surface will show the world. White gold is not a pale cousin found underground. It is alloy engineering dressed as color. Fact number 19. Cubic zirconia is simply natural zircon that has been manufactured in a lab. The names are almost designed to cause confusion. Zircon, zirconia, cubic zirconia. Since one is a natural gemstone and another is used as a diamond simulant, it sounds like the lab simply perfected zircon. They are different materials. Zircon is a natural mineral based on zirconium silicate. Cubic zirconia is zirconium dioxide, crystallized in a stabilized cubic structure. They share zirconium, but they do not share the same chemical composition or crystal structure. Their refractive index, density, hardness, and dispersion are also different. And cubic zirconia should not be confused with lab-grown diamond. A laboratory-grown diamond is carbon crystallized in the same fundamental structure as natural diamond. Cubic zirconia only resembles diamond visually. The fact came from a word root doing way too much work. Sharing zircon in the name does not create automatic mineral kinship. Zircon and cubic zirconia can sit in the same jewelry case and fool the same eye. Chemistry recognizes the difference long before the price tag finishes explaining it. Fact number 20. Amber is a yellow mineral that forms in rock like other gemstones. It is hard enough to polish, appears in jewelry, and is often displayed beside gems and minerals. If it is buried in sediment and sold as a stone, calling it a mineral feels natural. But amber is organic material. Ancient plant resin that was preserved and chemically transformed over geological time. It does not fit the classic mineralogical definition of an inorganic mineral with a characteristic crystalline structure. Its inclusions give away the story. Insects, plant fragments, and bubbles can become trapped while the resin is still sticky. That is nothing like a crystal growing atom by atom inside a mineral cavity. Not every hardened resin is amber either. Younger materials such as copal, reconstructed resin, and plastics can resemble it. The word gem describes use and value. Mineral describes a different scientific category. Amber can share a jewelry box with stones without becoming a stone. It is basically a chemical fossil of plant life that had millions of years to learn how to sit still. And now we reach another family of objects whose outer appearance hides complete layers. Fine china, engineered wood, cork, rubber, and automotive glass. Fact number 21. Bone china is called that because of its color and does not contain anything derived from bone. The name sounds so strange that it is easy to dismiss it as old-fashioned marketing. A thin white teacup does not look remotely like a bone, but traditional bone china really does use bone ash. Its ceramic body includes ash produced from processed, calcined bone material, along with other ceramic ingredients. That calcium phosphate-rich component contributes to the optical and mechanical properties associated with the material. Some standards and historical commercial definitions even specify minimum bone ash content for particular names. Modern formulations vary by market, and vegan or bone-free alternatives exist that aim for a similar appearance. That is exactly why the specific product matters. The finished cup does not look like bone because firing and ceramic chemistry transformed the ingredients completely. This time the strange name is not just poetic. The raw material really was behind it. Fact number 22. Plywood is made mostly from sawdust and tiny wood chips pressed together, basically like particle board. Walk through a home improvement store, and plywood, MDF, particle board, and OSB all sit in the same broad engineered wood family. From a distance, wood plus glue starts sounding like one universal recipe. Conventional plywood is made from thin sheets of wood veneer, not a mass of sawdust. Those sheets are glued in layers, usually with the grain direction alternating between neighboring layers. That geometry helps control dimensional movement and spread strength in more than one direction. The edge tells you the story. In plywood, you can see continuous sheets stacked together. Particle board shows particles. MDF uses much finer fibers. OSB uses large oriented strands or flakes. They are all engineered wood products, but they are not interchangeable, and they do not come from the same process. That does not mean every sheet of plywood is automatically superior. Species, number of plies, adhesive, internal voids, structural grade, moisture exposure, and manufacturing quality matter enormously. Engineered wood does not mean compressed sawdust. Plywood did not grind the tree until it forgot what it was. It sliced the wood into sheets and turned orientation into part of the engineering. Fact number 23. Harvesting cork requires cutting down the tree because the stopper comes from the trunk and the bark cannot grow back. A wine cork looks like a little cylinder of wood. If it comes from a tree, the simplest explanation is that somebody cut down the tree and carved up the trunk. Even after learning that cork is bark, stripping a thick outer layer from a tree sounds fatal. Cork oak, Quercus suber, is different. Under proper management, its specialized outer bark can be harvested periodically without cutting down the tree. After the outer cork layer is removed, the tree produces new cork over time. The same tree can participate in multiple harvests over a long life. That is why traditional cork systems track harvest cycles and aim to avoid damaging the living tissues underneath. None of that means every cork harvest is automatically sustainable. Poor timing, injury, fire, drought, and land use changes can still damage trees and ecosystems. The correction is narrower. Cork is a renewable bark resource, not simply wood from a felled trunk. A properly managed cork oak does not have to die to close a bottle. It can grow its protective armor back and do the job again. Fact number 24. All rubber used in tires, seals, and modern products comes from natural latex tapped from trees. The visual history of rubber starts with a tree. Make a cut in the bark, and milky latex drips into a cup. That image is so strong that rubber easily becomes synonymous with processed tree latex. Natural rubber is still extremely important and comes mainly from Hevea brasiliensis, but a huge family of synthetic rubbers is produced through polymer chemistry from industrial feedstocks. SBR, nitrile rubber, neoprene, and other elastomers can be tailored for properties natural rubber does not provide by itself. A modern tire is the perfect clue. It is usually a complex mixture of natural rubber, different synthetic rubbers, carbon black or silica, sulfur, oils, textile and metal reinforcement, and many other additives. Asking, "Is it rubber?" no longer tells you one botanical origin. Natural rubber remains unusually valuable for elasticity and fatigue resistance in certain applications. Synthetic rubbers did not replace it everywhere. The word survived a chemical revolution. Today, rubber can describe elastomers that have never seen a rubber tree in their lives. Fact number 25. A car windshield is just an ordinary sheet of glass made extra thick so it will not break. From the driver's seat, it looks like one giant window. When a rock hits it and a crack appears, it still looks like glass, so it is easy to assume safety comes mainly from thickness. Modern automotive windshields usually use laminated glass, 2 layers of glass bonded together with a plastic interlayer. When the glass breaks, that interlayer helps hold fragments together and preserve a barrier, instead of letting the entire pane immediately fall apart into loose pieces. Compare that with many traditional side windows. which often use tempered glass designed to fracture into smaller pieces when it fails. Some newer vehicles also use laminated side glass, so location alone is not a universal recipe. Automotive safety standards distinguish materials because different windows have different jobs involving visibility, occupant retention, penetration resistance, and emergency egress. The fact turns safer glass into more of the same glass. Quote, "The engineering changed something deeper. The way the material fails. A windshield can look dramatically cracked and still stay together because the layer you barely notice is doing exactly what it was designed to do." Now we leave physical materials and step into another fact factory: digital interfaces. Here, a label, a number, or a word like hidden can make us imagine capabilities the system never promised. Which of these beliefs would you have defended without hesitation? Save it for the comments, because the next section moves into tech and kitchen facts, where the name sounds perfectly truthful, right up until the mechanism shows up. Fact number 26. Renaming a file and changing the letters after the dot actually converts the file into a different format. You have photo, JPG. You rename it photo, PNG. The file name now shows the correct extension, so it looks as if you converted JPEG into PNG without opening any software. But a file extension is mainly a label that helps operating systems and applications guess what kind of file they should expect. The actual format is defined by the bytes inside the file: headers, encoding, compression, and internal structure. That becomes obvious when software tries to open the renamed file. Some programs inspect the content and may recognize that it is still a JPEG despite the wrong extension. Others trust the file name more heavily and may throw an error. Either way, changing 3 letters did not magically replace JPEG compression with PNG encoding. A real conversion requires software to decode the original content and save or encode it again using the destination format. That process can affect size, metadata, transparency, and sometimes image quality. Renaming is useful when the extension was wrong in the first place, but that is correcting the label, not transforming the data. Changing a box label from JPEG to PNG does not rearrange what is inside the box. Fact number 27. Using 2 different passwords in the same login counts as 2-factor authentication. 1 password can be stolen. 2 passwords must be twice as secure. And if the system asks for one secret and then another, the experience literally has 2 steps. But in cybersecurity, factor does not mean step. A factor is an independent category of evidence. Authentication systems commonly distinguish something you know, something you have, and something you are. 2 passwords are still 2 things you know. They belong to the same factor category. The weakness becomes obvious if both secrets can be stolen in the same way. A phishing page, keylogger, or credential stealing attack can potentially capture both without needing to steal a phone, hardware key, or biometric characteristic. Adding a second secret can still increase difficulty in some designs. It just does not automatically create factor diversity. Multi-factor authentication is valuable because an attacker may need to compromise different kinds of evidence. The fact confuses quantity with independence. 2 locks that both use the same kind of key may make a door more annoying to open. They do not turn it into a door protected by a key and a fingerprint. Fact number 28. A capacitive touchscreen detects your finger because it senses how hard you press on the glass. Older resistive touchscreens really did respond to pressure, and when a modern phone fails to register a tap, people still instinctively push harder. Sometimes that seems to help because pressing harder increases the contact area. But a typical capacitive touchscreen works electrically, not primarily mechanically. A network of electrodes creates and monitors an electric field. When a conductive object such as your finger approaches or touches the surface, it changes local capacitance. The system measures those changes and estimates where the contact occurred. The glove test exposes the mechanism. A thick, non-conductive glove can press firmly against the screen and still get no response. A bare finger can register with an extremely light touch, Some devices also include pressure-sensitive features or algorithms that infer force from contact size, but those are additional functions, not the basic operating principle of the capacitive panel. That is also why compatible styluses need conductive materials or active electronics. The screen is not waiting for you to push it downward. It is watching how your body changes a tiny electric field. Pushing harder may help your frustration. It does not necessarily help the sensor. Fact number 29. An e-ink display continuously uses electricity to keep a static page visible, just like an LCD. If words remain on a screen for an hour, it feels obvious that the device must keep powering every pixel. On a conventional display, cut power and the picture disappears. Electrophoretic e-ink works differently. Charged particles of different colors move inside microscopic capsules or related structures when an electric field is applied. Once those particles reach the desired arrangement, many e-ink systems are bistable. The image can remain visible without continuous energy being used to hold every pixel in place. A simple clue appears when some readers are fully powered down and the last page or shutdown image remains on the screen. The device still consumes power for other things: page changes, processor activity, wireless connections, storage access, and front lighting if it is turned on, so the battery does not last forever. But the static text itself is not necessarily being electrically pushed into visibility second after second. LCD and e-ink may both be flat screens, but they maintain images through very different physics. E-ink spends much more energy changing its mind than keeping it. Fact number 30. An OLED screen makes an image the same way an LCD does, using one large backlight behind all the pixels. LCD and OLED TVs are both thin, flat, bright panels. To a viewer watching the same movie, it is tempting to assume the difference is just better color filters or a higher quality backlight. A conventional LCD does need a light source behind or along the panel. Liquid crystals and filters control how much of that light reaches your eyes. OLED is emissive. Its organic light-emitting elements produce light when electric current passes through them. Individual pixels create their own light, so a global backlight is not required to make the image. Black scenes reveal the difference. An OLED can turn individual pixels off, so those areas emit essentially no light. An LCD has to block light that exists behind the panel. Although local dimming systems can reduce the backlight in regions and dramatically improve black levels, that does not make OLED automatically superior in every category. Brightness, power use, aging, cost, size, and image retention all depend on design and usage. The correction is architectural, not a declaration of a universal winner. LCD shines light and then controls it. OLED turns millions of picture elements into tiny light sources. The next facts look even simpler because they involve familiar numbers. Quality 100, 64-bit, gigahertz, and gigabytes. That is exactly why they make such effective facts. Fact number 31. A thermal receipt printer must have hidden ink or a tiny cartridge because black letters cannot appear from nowhere. A receipt slides out white with sharp black text. Every printer most people know uses some kind of pigment, ink, toner, or a ribbon, so it seems obvious that the consumable must be hidden inside the machine. In direct thermal printing, the reactive material is in the paper itself. The print head contains tiny heating elements that warm specific spots. A heat-sensitive chemical coating in the paper changes color when those spots reach the required temperature, creating dark dots that form letters and images. Old receipts provide a clue. Leave thermal paper in excessive heat, and it can darken or degrade without ever going through a printer again. Not every thermal printer works without a pigmented consumable. Thermal transfer printers use a ribbon that heat transfers onto the printing surface. That is why direct thermal and thermal transfer are different systems. The checkout printer only looks like magic because the consumable moved. With direct thermal printing, the paper already carries the chemistry. The print head simply tells it where to turn dark. The printer is not writing with invisible ink. It is drawing with heat. Fact number 32. Saving a JPEG with a quality slider set to 100 turns it into mathematically lossless compression. The slider reaches 100. 100 sounds like perfection. If the scale runs from 0 to 100, the natural interpretation is that the top setting means nothing was lost. But a JPEG quality number is not a universal percentage of original information preserved. Conventional JPEG usually relies on lossy compression involving transformations and quantization. A very high-quality setting makes the quantization less aggressive and can make differences visually negligible, but it does not automatically guarantee exact reconstruction of every original pixel value. Different programs also map their quality sliders to different encoder settings. 100 in one application is not necessarily identical to 100 in another. Reopen and compare the actual data, and tiny numerical differences may still appear, along with changes in metadata or encoding structure. True lossless image workflows use formats or modes designed for exact preservation. The fact came from a number that looks more objective than it really is. That slider does not measure percent truth retained. It tells the encoder how aggressively to trade file size against fidelity. Quality 100 can mean extremely high quality. It does not automatically mean bit-for-bit lossless. Fact number 33. A 64-bit processor is automatically twice as fast as a 32-bit processor, because 64 is twice 32. The comparison looks like basic math. If a highway has twice as many lanes, maybe it carries twice as much traffic. So a processor with twice as many bits should finish every job in half the time. But 64-bit architecture changes important things such as register widths, address space, and the amount of memory software can efficiently address. Performance depends on far more than that one number. Clock speed, core count, instructions per cycle, cache design, memory performance, compiler quality, algorithms, and software behavior can matter much more for a particular task. Run a small workload that does not need huge integers or large amounts of memory, and switching from a 32-bit environment to a 64-bit one does not force the program to perform half as many operations. Sometimes software gets faster, sometimes the difference is minor. In some cases, larger data structures can even increase memory use. Newer 64-bit processors are often dramatically faster than old 32-bit machines, but decades of engineering changed many things at once. 64-bit gives software a much larger workspace. It does not hand every program a universal 50% off coupon for execution time. Fact number 34. A processor with more gigahertz is always faster than one with fewer gigahertz, regardless of architecture. One computer says 3 gigahertz. Another says 4 gigahertz. Since gigahertz means billions of clock cycles per second, 4 looks like the obvious winner. But a clock cycle does not represent a fixed amount of useful work across different processor designs. A newer architecture may complete more instructions per cycle, execute more operations in parallel, use better branch prediction, larger caches, or specialized hardware units. Software matters too. A program can only benefit from hardware features it actually uses. Processor history provides plenty of examples where newer chips at similar or even lower clock speeds outperformed older designs because they accomplished more work per cycle, even within one processor family. Thermal limits, boost behavior, active core count, and memory can affect real speed. Gigahertz measures something real. The fact begins when we ask it to measure everything. Comparing CPUs only by clock rate is like comparing cars only by engine RPM without asking about gearing, torque, weight, or transmission. A faster clock makes more ticks. Finishing work depends on how much the processor accomplishes between those ticks. Fact number 35. Adding more RAM always makes a computer faster, even when it already has enough memory for the job. A RAM upgrade can transform a machine that freezes when too many browser tabs and programs are open. That improvement can be so dramatic that the advice becomes a law. If 8 gigabytes helped, then 16 must be twice as good, and 32 should make the computer fly. RAM helps enormously when the workload needs more memory than is available, and the system is constantly falling back to much slower storage. But once the machine has enough RAM to keep its active programs and data in memory, adding more capacity does not force the CPU, GPU, SSD, or network to become faster. If a rendering job uses 4 GB and is limited by CPU performance, leaving another 28 GB empty does not make the calculation finish sooner. There are nuances. Memory channel configuration, RAM speed, latency, and extra cache usage can influence performance in specific systems. That is different from saying, more capacity always equals more speed. The fact confuses removing a shortage with creating horsepower. A bigger desk is life-changing when your paperwork is spilling onto the floor. Once the desk is already mostly empty, buying another desk does not make you read faster. After misreading speed and memory, the next 3 digital facts confuse storage physics, tiny browser data, and an email feature with powers they never actually had. Fact number 36. Bringing a strong magnet near an SSD will erase the files because all computer storage is magnetic. The idea of magnets destroying data is deeply embedded in computer culture. It made sense for floppy disks, magnetic tape, and traditional hard drives. When hard drives were replaced by solid-state drives, the warning traveled with the word storage. But flash memory in an SSD stores information using electrical states in semiconductor cells. It does not store bits as tiny magnetic domains like a traditional hard drive platter. An ordinary magnet does not simply rewrite those electrical states by sitting near the case. Professional data sanitization guidance makes the difference clear. Degaussing can be useful for certain magnetic media. It is not an effective method for erasing flash memory. SSDs require appropriate electronic erase procedures, cryptographic erase methods, or physical destruction depending on the security goal. That does not mean playing with powerful magnets around electronics is a good idea. Components can be affected in other ways. The point is the storage mechanism itself. A hard drive writes magnetism. An SSD manages electrical charge and semiconductor cells. The old floppy disk warning survived. The physics of the bits changed. Fact number 37. Browser cookies are executable programs that can infect your computer like a virus. Privacy pop-ups talk about cookies, tracking, profiles, and consent. Cookies are something websites place on your device without you seeing them, and viruses also arrive through the internet. It is easy to merge the two threats. A normal web cookie is a small piece of data that a website asks the browser to store and return under defined rules. It may contain a session identifier, preferences, or values used for analytics and advertising. By itself, a cookie is not a program your operating system executes. A text value cannot independently replicate, rewrite system files, or install software. That does not make cookies harmless or irrelevant to security. A stolen session cookie can sometimes let an attacker impersonate a logged-in user, and tracking identifiers can reveal a great deal about browsing behavior. The risk is simply different from malware. A malicious website can attack the browser through other vulnerabilities, and a compromised browser can expose cookies. But the cookie did not become a virus just because it was involved. Sometimes passive data can be highly sensitive without being executable code. Fact number 38. Sending an email with BCC makes the message encrypted and invisible to mail providers and servers. The feature is called blind carbon copy. If the BCC recipient's address is hidden from the other recipients, it is easy to extend the word hidden to the entire message. BCC is much more limited. A BCC recipient receives the message without their address normally appearing in the visible to or CC fields shown to the other recipients. Mail servers still need enough routing information to deliver the message, and BCC by itself does not add end-to-end encryption to the message body. Modern email may use transport encryption such as TLS between systems, and separate technologies can encrypt or digitally sign message content. Those are different mechanisms with different goals. BCC is useful for basic recipient privacy when you do not want everyone on a mailing list to see everyone else's address. The mistake is turning that header behavior into a cryptographic guarantee. Hidden from the other recipients does not mean invisible to the infrastructure. BCC can draw a curtain between people in the room. It does not build a vault around the letter. Fact number 39. Baking soda and baking powder are the same leavening ingredient and can be swapped one for one in any recipe. Both are white powders. Both live in small containers. Both can help cakes, muffins, and cookies rise. Visually, they seem almost interchangeable. Baking soda is sodium bicarbonate, an alkaline compound. To produce carbon dioxide effectively in many recipes, it needs to react with acidic ingredients. Baking powder already contains a base plus one or more dry acids and other ingredients that help control moisture and reaction timing. That difference matters. Swap one for the other without changing anything else, and you can alter gas production, pH, flavor, browning, and when the reaction happens. A recipe using buttermilk, natural cocoa, or citrus may be relying on that ingredient's acidity. Another recipe may rely on double-acting baking powder to release gas at more than one stage. Substitutions can sometimes be engineered by changing ratios and ingredients. The fact is assuming a one-to-one swap without understanding the chemistry. Both containers can create bubbles. Baking soda waits for an acid partner. Baking powder usually brings much of the chemistry with it. Fact number 40. Every brown color and toasted flavor in cooking comes from sugar caramelization. Golden bread, roasted coffee, seared steak, dark onions, and caramel all turn brown under heat. Caramelized is such an appealing culinary word that it gets used to explain almost any delicious browned surface. But caramelization and Maillard reactions are different chemical families. Caramelization mainly involves thermal reactions of sugars. Maillard chemistry occurs between carbonyl compounds, often reducing sugars, and amino groups from amino acids or proteins, creating a huge variety of aromatic molecules and brown pigments. A steak crust is the giveaway. There is relatively little free sugar compared with a pot of caramel, but there are plenty of proteins and molecules that participate in Maillard reactions. Pure sugar, meanwhile, can caramelize without amino acids being present. In real foods, both pathways can occur alongside many other reactions. Temperature, moisture, pH, and composition determine what dominates. Brown is an appearance, not a molecular diagnosis. The kitchen does not have one button labeled browning. It has a crowd of chemical reactions competing to manufacture flavor, while we stand over the skillet and give them one convenient name. And now the kitchen turns into a laboratory. Sourdough, brown sugar, chocolate bloom, cast iron, and vacuum packaging show that a recipe or package can hide as much chemistry as a screen. Fact number 41. Sourdough is bread without yeast. It rises only because of bacteria. You do not dump in a packet of commercial baker's yeast. Yet a mature starter fills the dough with bubbles. Because sourdough is often presented as an alternative to yeast bread, it is easy to assume bacteria are doing all the lifting. A sourdough starter is a microbial community. It contains lactic acid bacteria and also yeasts capable of fermenting sugars and producing carbon dioxide. The exact community varies with flour, temperature, hydration, environment, and how the starter is maintained. But I did not add commercial yeast does not mean there are no yeasts. Yeasts are major contributors to leavening in many starters, while bacteria help create acidity, flavor, preservation effects, and texture. Some bakers also combine starter with a small amount of commercial yeast for more predictable timing. The fact confuses a commercial ingredient with an entire group of organisms. No added baker's yeast can be true. No yeast organisms is a different claim. The starter looks like flour and water because its workers are too small for the photograph. Inside, bacteria and fungi have been negotiating gas and acidity for generations. Fact number 42. All commercial brown sugar is raw sugar that naturally kept its molasses because it was never refined. The color looks like proof of origin. White means processed. Brown means closer to the sugar cane. That story is simple, visual, and extremely useful in marketing. But commercial brown sugars can be made in different ways. A common manufacturing route uses refined sucrose with molasses added or reintroduced to create a specific color, moisture level, and flavor. That is why two brown sugars can differ in crystal size, intensity, and molasses content without simply representing more or less refining. Compare soft brown sugar with raw sugar, turbinado, or demerara, and the visual category starts falling apart. They can all look brown while coming from different processing histories. That does not mean every brown sugar is simply white sugar painted brown. Some products retain components differently during processing. The problem is the absolute claim. Color tells you something about molasses and processing. It does not tell you the entire biography of the crystal. Brown can reflect retained molasses, added molasses, or a particular production method. It is not an automatic certificate saying the sugar was never refined. Fact number 43. If a chocolate bar develops a white or gray coating, mold has grown on it. Open an old bar and the surface may look dusty, pale, streaked, or blotchy. On bread, fruit, or cheese, a similar-looking layer can be mold, so the instinctive reaction makes sense. Chocolate commonly develops something else called bloom. Fat bloom happens when fats, especially cocoa butter, migrate and recrystallize at the surface. Sugar bloom happens when moisture dissolves some surface sugar and then evaporates, leaving visible sugar crystals behind. Both can turn glossy chocolate dull and pale without a fungus building that coating. Temperature swings encourage fat migration and recrystallization. Condensation and humid storage can encourage sugar bloom. The chocolate may lose texture, shine, and eating quality without automatically becoming moldy. That does not mean every suspicious patch on every chocolate product is safe. Fillings, damaged packaging, unusual odors, or clear signs of contamination still matter. The correction is about appearance, not a declaration that chocolate can never spoil. Sometimes the bar is not growing new life. Its fat or sugar crystals simply moved into places where your eyes interpret them as an emergency. Fact number 44. A cast iron skillet becomes nonstick because the iron absorbs oil and flavors deep into its pores. A well-seasoned skillet gets darker and can improve with use. The romantic explanation is that the iron drinks oil and stores memories of every meal somewhere inside the metal. The main seasoning process happens at the surface. When a very thin layer of oil is heated appropriately, molecules can oxidize and polymerize, forming a solid film bonded to the iron. Repeated thin layers build a dark coating that helps protect the metal and can improve cooking behavior. The clue appears if you grind or sand the skillet back to bare metal. Much of that black history disappears with the surface. There were not cups of cooking oil hiding deep inside microscopic pores. Surface texture can help the coating adhere, but pores that absorb flavor is too literal an explanation. Sticky old grease and burnt food are not the same thing as good seasoning either. A properly polymerized film does not need to preserve the flavor of last Sunday's breakfast. The word seasoning sounds culinary. Chemically, the process is closer to building a polymer coating directly on the pan. Your skillet does not need to remember your eggs. It needs a thin, stable surface film that stays attached to the metal. Fact number 45. Vacuum-sealed food is practically sterilized because microorganisms cannot survive once the air has been removed. The plastic pulls tight around the food and almost every visible bubble disappears. Without oxygen, it feels as though bacteria have been deprived of the one thing they need to live. Removing air can slow oxidation and inhibit many organisms that depend on oxygen. But it does not automatically kill microorganisms already present, and not every microbe requires oxygen. Anaerobic and facultative microorganisms can survive or grow under low oxygen conditions if temperature, moisture, acidity, and other conditions are favorable. That is why sterilization and packaging are separate processes. A shelf-stable commercial food may rely on heat treatment, acidity, reduced water activity, preservatives, specialized packaging, or several barriers at once. A home vacuum bag does not automatically reproduce all of them. Perishable vacuum-sealed foods may still require refrigeration or freezing depending on the product. Vacuum packaging is extremely useful for reducing oxidation, freezer burn, and certain kinds of quality loss. It simply has a more specific job than the fact gives it. Removing air changes the environment. It does not press a biological delete button. Two objects remain, and both look as though they are made from one simple material. A beverage can and a drink carton finish the list by showing that the most important layer can be the one you can barely see. Fact number 46. Soda or beer inside an aluminum can sit directly against bare metal for its entire shelf life. From the outside, the can is aluminum. Cut one open, and the inside still looks metallic. So it seems obvious that an acidic drink must be touching aluminum from the factory until the last sip. Most modern beverage cans use an extremely thin internal polymer or resin coating. That film separates the drink from the metal, helps reduce corrosion, and limits reactions that could affect flavor, color, or the structural integrity of the package. The coating can be so thin and transparent that your eyes still see metallic shine underneath it. Not seeing a layer does not mean the metal is bare. Formulations have changed over time as regulations and manufacturing requirements change, so it would be wrong to claim that every can uses exactly the same resin chemistry. The broader point is simpler. A beverage can is a material system, not just a bent sheet of aluminum. The metal provides structure, low weight, and barrier performance. A microscopic film handles much of the chemical conversation with the drink. The fact notices the thickest wall and forgets the thinnest layer. Sometimes the material that matters most is the one you cannot distinguish with the naked eye. Fact number 47. Modern milk and juice cartons are simply thick paper coated in wax, so they do not get soggy. That explanation has a real history. Paper food containers have used wax treatments, and the familiar carton still looks like waterproof cardboard. So the old explanation easily survives into the modern grocery store. Many current cartons use laminated structures with polymer layers, such as polyethylene, rather than relying on one simple wax coating. Shelf-stable aseptic cartons may add an aluminum barrier and several specialized layers designed to control oxygen, light, moisture, sealing, and food contact. Cut through a brick-style carton, and the wall that looked like one material becomes a sandwich of materials, each with a different job: stiffness, adhesion, barrier performance, liquid containment, and heat sealing. Not all cartons use the same architecture. A refrigerated gable-top milk carton and a shelf-stable aseptic package can be built differently, and technologies vary by manufacturer and region. The correction is aimed at the word just. Quote, "The package looks simple because paper dominates what your eyes see. Its wall can actually be a carefully engineered laminate, measured in fractions of a millimeter. The paper provides the body. The nearly invisible layers are what let liquid live inside without turning the package into pulp." After 47 facts, one pattern keeps showing up. Everyday misconceptions rarely survive because they are completely ridiculous. They survive because they are efficient. It has blades. It's a vacuum. It's silver. It's glass. It's ink. It's yeast. One short phrase replaces a mechanism that actually has several layers. The problem begins when we stop using that shortcut as an approximation and start treating it like a law. Looking inside changes everything. A coating can matter more than the metal, an invisible layer more than the cardboard, and one small technical detail more than the entire product name. Curiosity does not make the world unnecessarily complicated. It just stops a convincing appearance from pretending to be an explanation.